Welcome to the Neighborhood Law Center. I'm your host, Melvin Burris, and today our guest is Robert Rahemba, Counselor at Law.
Yes.
Welcome, sir.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Our subject is going to be homeowners behind on their mortgage or can no longer afford their mortgage. But before we get into that, Counselor, would you tell our audience a little about yourself and your background?
Yeah, I've been, I'm an attorney and I've been practicing law for 38 years. And I've been doing real estate, and I'm a general practitioner, and I've been doing real estate for probably about 30 years of that time. Mm-hmm. I've been in Fishkill for almost all that period of time. I started in Beacon and I moved to Fishkill and have been a sole practitioner since about 1984.
Okay. So how long have you been into the real estate market area, and what facets? I did real estate before that, but primarily about 1984 when I went on my own, I started to do more real estate, representing buyers and sellers, and eventually I got to the point where I represented banks, doing closings for banks if they needed a bank attorney, and I would travel. I've traveled as far as Port Jervis to go to do a closing, and take a Newburgh or Kingston, stuff like that. One thing is interesting you were speaking about is that you're also a referee for banks, that banks hire you as their referee.
Yeah, I'm appointed by the court to be a referee, and I've done that in the past where I've represented. You go and I represent the court, and what happens at that point is it comes to a date where there has been no resolution, so we call a foreclosure sale date, and the banks have published a notice in the paper for 3 weeks, and then there's an actual date, and on that date, and there's a time and place, everybody goes to it's usually courthouse, and you stand on the steps like you see, and you have a foreclosure sale.
All right. Well, let me ask you this question. Have you ever seen the housing market in such a situation in your 30-odd years of practicing real estate law?
No, this is the worst that I've seen it in 30 years. I lived through the one in the beginning of the 80s, but this one's, I think, much worse. I think there's a lot more problems this time around.
Okay, if I was a client coming to your office and say, Counselor, I'm behind on my mortgage, and I can't afford my mortgage anymore. As we talked about before, I qualified as a two-person family. My wife and myself qualified. She's no longer working, or I got laid off or something like that. What would your counsel be to them in their options of what they can do?
Well, I would sit down with them and first of all, find out how much income they do have, and to see what their options are. There's 5 basic things that they could do. One would be a bank workout. A second would be a deed in lieu of foreclosure. A third would be what we call is a short sale. A fourth procedure would be actual foreclosure, and the fifth would be, if everything else doesn't work, a bankruptcy. So I would sit down and see where they are and what option fits their situation the best.
Okay, well, if they had a letter from the bank saying you're going into foreclosure, what are the criteria for a bank to put somebody in foreclosure?
Usually they want you to be 90 days or more behind on your payments to the bank, your mortgage payments. And once you're behind, that generates a litigation where they would start a foreclosure action.
Yeah. No, so give us a little more about what do I do then if I get this notice, as you're saying, that they're putting me in foreclosure because I'm 3 months behind or 4 months behind. What do I do then?
Well, again,
what does the homeowner do at that time?
At the homeowner, we'll look at, again, we'll have to look at what income they have, and first of all, if they have sufficient income to keep making the mortgage or a reduced amount, and there's been a layoff, because the banks, to do a workout, the banks want to see some type of necessity for it and what caused it, and they want to see that you just can't go in and say, well, I just want to modify my mortgage. They want to see if the person, as in this case, where they lost their job, they lost one of the incomes and they need two incomes. So now we're in a situation where they only have one. You can look to see what that person's making and is it enough to do what we call a workout with the bank where they would modify the mortgage down by interest rate and monthly payment, and if that's feasible. And then...
Okay. So you're saying when I get this notice, I'll go to the bank and say, let's try to work this out.
Yeah.
Type thing. Okay. And what you're saying is the bank doesn't care about your other debts. They're only concerned with can you maintain your mortgage payments?
Correct.
Okay.
Because they won't put you into a program if you can't afford it. So that they'll look at the banks what they will look for is financials from you for your tax returns, your financials, and they'll what the hardship is. And once you give that to them, they'll...
Is there a time period that you're on this program that we may call it?
It takes 6 months, to a year to go through that process, giving them what they want. And then there's no guarantee at the end that they're going to agree to anything that you want or need. So that's why there's other steps that you may have to go through if the workout doesn't work out.
Okay. So now I'm saying we're at that point where the workout doesn't work out, and I still have this foreclosure notice. Is there anything else I can do? Or the homeowner can do, I should say.
There's another step called a deed in lieu of foreclosure. And what that is, it's you go to the bank and you owe, usually it's done where you owe more money to the bank than what the property's worth. So say you had a mortgage for $225,000, you find your house is worth only $200,000, so even if you sold it, you're not going to get more than $200,000, and you have to pay broker's commission. So what you do is you go to the bank and you say, listen, I'll save you the cost of going through a foreclosure action, which takes anywhere from 12 months to 18 months to do, and it costs the bank anywhere from $5,000 to $7,500, plus they pay your taxes and everything else. And you say, I will deed the house back to you, and you forgive the mortgage. And if the person hasn't really got to the point where they've had a lot of judgments against them, that's a very big possibility that the bank will say, yeah, I'll take the property back, and because now they'll get it back and they can put it back on the market to sell, and they can get somebody else in and pay it off.
I guess in a high cost area like Westchester, where taxes in some areas are $18,000 or $20,000 a year, it's a big incentive for the banks.
Because the bank, once they start the foreclosure, they're on the hook for paying those taxes because the people don't have it and they won't do it. But if you go more than 2 years without paying the taxes, they can go up their tax sale, and then the county will take back the property, and the bank will be cut off.
Right. Okay. So the other side of it is, I guess a lot of municipalities are now demanding or bringing local laws that says, bank, you have to take care of this property.
Yes.
Which is additional cost that you have to take in consideration.
Yeah. Because if you don't do the deed in lieu of foreclosure and the people just walk away from the house is vacant. What happens is vandalism. People break in. Right now, copper is a big item. These houses are being broken in, copper is being taken out, which caused the bank an extra expense putting that back together. So, and then also they have to mow the lawns, shovel the sidewalks. They have to go in if the house has water in it. They have to winterize the house to make sure the pipes don't freeze, because if they don't do that, if it gets cold out and there's no heat or the oil runs out, the pipes freeze, and then we have water damage, which leads to mold. And then mold's a big problem. So
it's an, I'm listening to you and I'm hearing you and I'm saying that one of the, in our talks, you're saying that 90% of the people, when they have this situation, don't get involved with an attorney. And it appears to me that there's a big reason to get involved, to curtail the length of the foreclosure or these workouts and everything else. Well, why do you think that, besides money, that they're hesitant to, I know you're going to say money.
Money's a big item. They don't. If they had the money, they wouldn't be behind on their mortgage. But some people think that there's the banks tell them we can work this out, we can work it out, and they try to work it out without the necessity of an attorney. But when it gets to the point where the bank says, well, we're now going to foreclose, or the other option would be a short sale.
Okay.
And at a short sale is where the bank works with you to take less than what is owed. And the key on working it for the clients on a short sale is that a lot of times there's two mortgages, a first mortgage and a second mortgage. But what you want to do and what you want to achieve as an attorney for the client is that you have to make sure that the banks, when they do a release to the people, that release releases the people individually and not just the land. Because a lot of the banks, what they will do is they'll say, we'll release you for this deficit, and say the deficit's, say, $80,000. They will say they release the property, but they don't release the person.
Oh, I see.
And then so they then come after the person on the promissory note, because every mortgage has a promissory note with it. They're promised to pay back the money. So the banks will come after them, and they also look at your financials. And sometimes I've had one right now where they're making they say that the sellers have enough money to pay back the second mortgage, and they're making them sign a promissory note for like $40,000, with them having to pay that back
Out of the sale of the home. Or
no, they're out of they're going to sign a promissory. What they're going to do is they're selling the house. There's a $40,000 shortage. The sellers are walking away, but with a promissory note to the bank that they're going to pay back the difference.
It seemed like they had $40,000. They wouldn't be walking away, but I guess it depends on the situation, as you said before. One of the things is also, you were saying that the difference also becomes taxable income.
Correct. If the IRS states that any forgiveness of debt, whether it's on a mortgage or even on your credit cards, is income to the person who they forgive it to. So if, for instance, the bank forgave $50,000 worth of difference on the mortgage on the short sale, the IRS would make you include that money, that $50,000, on your next tax return as income.
So let's make it clear. The bank will send the IRS a 1099,
correct,
saying that this was forgiven, and that way put them on notice.
It was a big burden on everybody. So the Congress passed a law in 2007, Debt Relief Act, Mortgage Debt Relief Act, which says that is not going to be considered as income. If it's your primary residence, they will not include it on your income tax return, and you can forgive up to $2 million if it's a husband and wife, up to $2 million of debt.
So you're talking about second homes and third homes.
Well, you can't. No, you can't get. It's not available for any second home. It's only for your primary residence.
Okay. Now, we need a appraisal or comparables. How do you get that when everything's in a down market?
Well, they go back like 6 months and they see what has sold in your area, and then the brokers do what is being currently listed and also what has sold in the last 6 months, to give the bank some type of idea that what the price should be, and then the bank will either say yes or no. And on a short sale, it takes the bank anywhere from 60 to 120 days for them to come back and say they will accept whatever the price is. So it's anything but a short sale. They really should call it a long sale, because it's long in time. It's longer than a normal real estate transaction, and you have to have a lot of patience, because the banks, they're just so swamped, they do not get back to you right away.
Well, do you have to stay current on your mortgage for a short sale?
No, that's where the forgiveness of debt comes in. So people on a short sale, they work with the bank, and it can be before the foreclosure action or it could be during the foreclosure action. So it could be a joint effort, but the bank is calling the shots, because what happens is, say the house is worth $200, but if they owe like $250 on the bank with the bank agrees to take the $200 if that's what the comparables say, and if it's sold for $200, then you send that to the bank, and then they at that time will say yes, they approve it or not. If they approve it, then you will have like 30 days to close, and the buyers, if you have a buyer lined up, usually it's a contract. we do have what we call as a short sale contract, and the terms of the contract are written in such a way that says that the seller is the seller in name only. The whole deal is contingent upon the bank approving this transaction, because what is owed to the bank is more than what they are going to sell it for.
Let me ask you, how does the real estate agent get sold on something like this, and how does the attorney get sold? Is that separate money, or is it part of the proceeds?
Most of the time, the bank agrees to pay the brokers and the attorney.
Okay.
Up front, we put in what the fee for the seller's attorney will be. The brokers tell what their commission, and then we prepare what is called a HUD-1. And on that HUD, you list all the expenses, and that's sent to the bank. And you can't, they're very, very, very picky about, you can't change what they've agreed upon. And if you do change, you have to go through a lengthy process to get figures changed, because once they have agreed to something, and most of the brokers will take a lesser percentage, than normal, and the attorneys take a little less sometimes too. But
Okay.
everybody takes less, but this is
The deal gets done.
the deal gets done, and there's no expense to the sellers.
Okay, so now we first walk in, we're talking about a workout with a bank before a foreclosure. If that doesn't work out, we then discuss the fact that of a deed in lieu of foreclosure, where I turn my house over to the bank and walk away, and they do whatever they need to do with it. The second one's a short sale. We sell the house at the market value, but maybe less than what's owed to the bank.
Right.
Okay. Now, now none of these are working out for us. What do we do now?
Well, what happens?
Or the bank does now.
Well, the bank gets to the point where they say, well, this is not going to work. So they go through what is called a legal proceeding called foreclosure. That's a legal proceeding where they go and they serve the people with papers that they're going to take back the house, and for the amount of money that's owed to the bank. And the people at that point, they do have a process through the courts where they do try to have a workout. They have a referee that's he's kind of a referee that's appointed, where he's going to mediate with the bank and the owners to try to see if there's some type of common ground, again, that everybody can agree to take less or take whatever, because the banks really don't want the house back. And so there's another last-ditch effort to see if there can be something worked out. If it doesn't work out, then it's put back on the schedule for foreclosure, and then there's a referee will be appointed, as I spoke about, and then the bank publishes it in the paper. It has to be published in the paper for once a week for 3 weeks, and then there's an actual date of sale, and at that time, whoever bids the highest gets the house. But what happens to the people at that point is the next step.
Okay, now you're saying once the foreclosure starts, the homeowners are in their home. They're paying their bills or the utilities anyways to keep the lights on, but they're not paying their mortgage.
Correct.
Okay. So okay.
They live in, well, what happens is that while it's being foreclosed, these foreclosures, I just had one that took 2 years, and these people lived in the house for 2 years without paying any mortgage or taxes. All they did is pay their utilities. But that's what's why the banks try to work these out, because they don't want people staying in these houses for 2 years rent free. And the banks are, like you said, there's a lot of taxes are due, and the bank has to go every year and pay those taxes so they don't go into delinquency, so they don't lose it for taxes.
But there's a good side if they stay in, because as you mentioned before, all the things that can happen to a home. People come in and vandalize it.
Yes.
They come in and take the pipes,
Right.
the copper
yeah.
out of the homes, the sinks, whatever is in there, the mold that you spoke about before.
Yeah, because if the house is let go from the point that you get, like you say, if something happens, the roof leaks and it doesn't get fixed, that will lead to water damage in the house and eventually to mold. And I really mean that's the biggest concern of the banks today, is all these houses are getting water damage in them because of neglect, and then they're worth with that type of situation, you have to go and practically gut the house to make it
to get rid
livable.
of the mold,
Right. So it's a big expense.
So now we come to we mentioned before the alternative is continue with this foreclosure, or a U.S. consular says to your client,
Yeah.
what about bankruptcy? I guess.
Well, see,
Is there any point you say that, or is that ever becomes an alternative?
it's an alternative right from the beginning. I'll discuss with them. I'll tell them that this is so because they're worried about what's going to happen. I'm going to owe the bank $80,000. What's going to happen to me? Because if they don't do anything and the bank gets a deficiency judgment against them for, say, $80,000, the bank has a right, because it's a judgment, to go after these people by attaching their wages.
Now, explain to us the deficiency judgment on the foreclosure.
All right. What happens is that the bank takes back the property and owns the property now, but they can't. They're owed $100,000, and they sell it for they buy it back for $50,000, because that's what they do is the bank will go out and have it appraised at the time of sale, because they cannot get any more
Than the appraisal.
than what the appraised value is. So they'll bid the $50,000, but it means that now the bank's got 50, but the house they're owed 100. So now they have a $50,000 deficiency.
Deficiency, okay. And the homeowner is still on
the hook for it.
On the hook for that $50,000.
And then the bank has
There's no forgiveness on that one, right?
No, they're not. They're not forgiving it. So
because it's a judicial proceeding, they're not.
Yeah.
Okay.
They have they have a judgment now, and they can go after, if that person has a job, they can go after his or her wages. If they have bank accounts, they can go after those bank accounts, and they can make life kind of miserable for the person.
Okay. So right at the beginning, you're saying, okay, why would I want to do the bankruptcy? The homeowner wants to do the bankruptcy.
The bankruptcy.
We heard of bad things about these other four.
Well, bankruptcy. The bankruptcy is, you're in foreclosure. So at that point, bankruptcy, even the stigma of a bankruptcy, is.
Let me ask you, you're in foreclosure, or they're giving you notice for foreclosure, which once you're in foreclosure.
Well, before foreclosure, you would look as an alternative, maybe bankruptcy, if the bank is not being agreeable.
Friendly.
Okay. Correct. You may say, well, the way to cut through all the red tape is just maybe you just go bankrupt and get it over with, because the bank's not going to agree in any way. So if they're saying to you, I am going to hold you personally responsible for this $50,000, I am not going to forgive that, and I want you to sign a promissory note, and if you don't sign a promissory note, I'm going to make your life miserable, then you say to the client, they don't want those phone calls in the middle of the day, at night, and all that time from the bank saying, when are you going to pay this $50,000 back? They may want to go bankrupt and get that debt forgiven and erased so they can go move on with their life. And that using bankruptcy as a starting point for starting their new life.
Now, why don't more people use bankruptcy than all these stories we hear about foreclosure?
I think people think that bankruptcy ruins their credit and their life forever, and it really doesn't. I've had clients come in and have a mortgage, and have a lot of people tend to rely on plastic to pay, credit cards, and they will run these credit cards up $50,000, $75,000. I had one for $150,000 that had credit card debt. What I will do sometimes with a person is I will say, why can't you afford? And if it's the credit card that they can't afford, what I can do is use bankruptcy. I can wipe out the credit card debt and have them reaffirm on the mortgage. So they'll go through the bankruptcy proceeding, get rid of their credit card debt, and still be able to keep their house and mortgage and keep that current. They have to keep it current. If they can't make the payments, then there's no hope, and then you just let the house go.
You mentioned before that there has to be a certain amount of equity in the home.
What most people don't realize is that bankruptcy court allows you $50,000 worth of equity in the house for one person, $100,000 for two people. So what it means is that if a person comes in and they have a house and it could be a situation that they have equity in the house, so they're not in a short sale position, but they have equity. Say they owe $200, but the house is worth $300. This house I could put with using their exemptions on that equity in the house. They can go bankrupt, get rid of the debt, but not lose the house.
I see.
Because their trustee won't take it because it's an exempt.
Okay. All right. So is there any positive to, and there's two different types of bankruptcy. There's Chapter 7, Chapter 13, and everything else. It looks like we're running out of time here. Would you, wrapping this up, what would you tell our clients if they're in this type of situation?
Well, they should sit down and see what they can afford, and go over their finances, what they have available, and then they would have to figure out where they want to go. If they want to stay in the house, they really have to be able to afford the house. Some people want to stay and they can't afford it.
So all this is fact driven.
Yes.
That it's not a cookie cutter for everybody. That each situation we talked about here is fact driven for a particular homeowner.
Yes.
And that's why it's necessary, I assume, is to sit down with an attorney. I mean, I don't know what you charge, but minimum $300 to sit down to find out your options.
Yes.
Would you think that would be the prudent thing to do?
Yeah, it would always be the most prudent thing to do. That way they would know where they're going. Because when they come in, a lot of times they think it's the end of the world, and it really may not be the end of the world, because there may be a way to save what they think they lost. But only an attorney who knows all the ins and outs of everything can guide them the right way through this maze of chaos.
I'm going to ask you a question other than that, but with these appraisals now going down, the assessments now going down, how is this affecting municipalities, the local governments?
They're all having, well, a lot of them there are lowering their assessments every year now by what the overall, they have an assessment rate, so they'll take a 5% all across the board for all the different assessments. So the actual assessment values in the towns are going down now because of this situation.
And the homeowner has the opportunity of doing a certiorari,
yes,
and getting a refund. Well, we're running out of time. I'm going to want to thank you for coming. We learned quite a bit. I've been your host, Melvin Burris. Our guest has been
Bob Rahemba.
Okay. If you have any questions on real estate, bankruptcy, foreclosure, please give them a call. And also go to our website, www.neighborhoodlawcenter.com. This program will be on there within the next 2 weeks, and other programs are already there. But I want to shout out to my Charlottesville, Virginia viewers, to Angela Burris, Lloyd and Mary Burris, and to my Aunt Louise Howard and family who watches us down in Charlottesville. And I want to say to everybody else, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week.